deep sea physiology and decompression sickness. What are the most important points that I am going to discuss in today's lectures are nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, carbon dioxide toxicity, and I also discuss about the decompression sickness. So before start about the detailed discussions about the different important point that is related with the deep sea physiology, we must have some basic knowledge for better understanding of the mechanisms of nitrogen narcosis, mechanisms of oxygen toxicity as well as carbon dioxide toxicity along with decompression sickness. See here, in previous lectures I have already discussed about the pressures in high altitude at sea level. What we have seen, the atmospheric pressures at sea levels, this is around 760 millimeter mercury. Once we ascend into high altitude, there is a decrease in the atmospheric pressures. Due to decrease in the atmospheric pressures, we have seen there are several negative impacts of these low pressures in human body. If you compare the things with the underwater, means below sea levels, you will find some differences. Here in this particular case, when altitude increases, there is a decrease in the barometric pressures, but in this particular case, below the sea level, increase in barometric pressures. So this increase in barometric pressures is the most culprit that leads to the developments of different type of negative impact in human systems. Right? Here you can see one thing, how the pressure changes once the persons descend into the deep of the sea. Right? See, at the sea level, when the depth is 0 meters, so 0 feet, the atmospheric pressure is only 1 atmosphere, right? Which is equivalent to 760 millimeter mercury, right? Once the person descends under sea level, the pressure changes. 10 meter depth causes increase in the pressure level. Here, in depth levels, when it is 33 feet or 10 meters, the pressure level is 2, right? Again, you see further increase of depth means additions of 10 more meters or 33 feet along with the previous ones. Again, there is an increase in pressures. Means every 10 meter increase in the depth, there is a linear increase of pressures. It means when the person descends at the very deep of the sea, there will be high pressures. That is what I have mentioned in the first slide. With the increase of the depth, there is an increase of barometric pressures. Right? Now see how these pressures increase is related to the volume changes or volume of gas changes. Right? See at the sea levels, the volume is suppose 1 liters. Once pressure increases, volume decreases. Right? Volume is half of the initial volume, right? At the same time, if you see the pressures here at the very deep parts of the oceans or deep of the sea, you will find the pressure and its volumes again further decrease. So what is the relationship here? The relationship is with the increase of pressures, there is a decrease in the volume. That can be explained by a law called Boyle's law. See, according to the Boyle's, pressures is inversely proportional to the volume of gases. What does it mean? It means with increase in barometric pressures, gas is compressed to smaller volume. That we have already seen here in this slide. There is a compression of the gas volume with the increase of the pressures, right? And pressures increases with the increase of the depth, right? Now see, Here, the volume changes and pressure changes, or both things affects the physiological systems. Now we will discuss how this volume changes and pressure changes affects the human body. So as I already mentioned, in today's lectures, I am going to discuss mainly three things, that is nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, carbon dioxide toxicity, along with decompression sickness. See here, what is the most important things happens here when the barometric pressure rises? See, higher alveolar gas pressures with the increase of barometric pressures. So this higher alveolar gas pressures is nothing, it is also denoted by hyperbarism. This hyperbarism is the most important one for the lungs, because this hyperbaric conditions leads to the collapse of lung. And this collapse of lungs are mainly due to the compressions of gases in the lung alveoli. So it means when the pressure is high, the deep of the ocean, it directly affects our alveolar systems. It causes the collapse of lung, right? Now, if you see the distributions of the different type of gases in the atmospheres as well as in deep sea, and how this distribution of different type of gases affects our system. To explain this ones, we must know about another law that is called as Henry's law. So what is the basic features of the Henry's law? According to the Henry's law, the concentrations of dissolved gas is directly proportional to its partial pressure. So as I mentioned, the deep of the sea, the pressure is very high. So if the pressure is very high in the deep, so there is a high chances of the dissolving property of different gases. I mean, the different type of gas will dissolve more as because the increase of pressures in deep of the sea. Now from this diagrams you can see, in normal pressures, the gaseous molecules, the number of gaseous molecules is dissolved is very less, right? In the first columns, here crystals is the very upper part of the surface, right? There is no such pressures. But if you see this one, due to the applications of certain force, it increases the pressures, and this increased pressures allows the molecules to dissolve more and more. That is explained by Henry's law. So you can see, with increase in barometric pressures, amount of gas dissolves in body fluid increases. So here two things. These two things actually alters the physiological property. The first thing is, with the increase of barometric pressures, there is a decrease of volume of the gases, right? Here, with the increase of pressures, there is a high solubility of the molecules. So these two things affect the physiological systems. Now that I am going to discuss how these things affect the system. See here, as you already know that water is much denser than air, right? So pressures increases by 1 atmosphere for every 10 meter or 33 feet increase of depth from sea level. These pressures compresses air-filled spaces like lungs, sinuses, ears, and dive mask. If a diver does not equalize the pressures by exhaling through the nose, they may experience a physiological trauma called barotrauma. And this barotrauma causes the damage of different systems, right? And this damage are mainly due to increased pressure in the depth of the sea. If pressure continues to build without equalizations, it can lead to ruptured eardrums, sinus pain, lung overexpansions, along with even alveolar ruptures, which is called the collapsing of lungs. So this is the most important thing, that due to the barometric pressures, there is a high chances of lung collapsing, right? Due to high pressures in the deep sea, there is a high chances of lung collapse. See here, as all of us know, the percentage distributions of different type of gas in atmospheres. The most important one is the nitrogens, that is around 78%, followed by oxygen and carbon dioxide. So, if you see the normal property of the nitrogen gas, we inhale nitrogens, but these nitrogens cannot cross the alveolar membrane. They cannot enter into the blood circulation, however, the passes in normal conditions, in normal pressures. But once the person descends into the deep sea, this nitrogen gas easily can dissolve in the circulatory blood, and even this nitrogen gas easily can dissolve in various tissues. As I have already mentioned, with the increase of pressures, there is an increase of dissolving property of the gases. That is why here nitrogen gas easily dissolved into the body fluid as well as in the tissue, right? Now we will see how this nitrogen gas affects the systems. If you see the property of the nitrogen gas under high pressures, it has some target points. So what is the target points? The target point is, it mainly targets the brain cells. So why it targets the brain cells? Because it has special property that it easily can dissolve the fat. And if you see the property of the fats in human body, the most important part where maximum fats are present are into our brain cell, right, or nerve cell. If you see the nerve cell structural features, the most of the important property is it is myelinated, which is composed of polyunsaturated fatty acids. So here, this nitrogen gas easily can dissolve to the fat, right? It means it directly dissolves to the brain cell or fat presence in the brain cell. Now, what is the exact effect of this nitrogen gas in brain cell that I am going to discuss? See, this is called nitrogen narcosis, a very important point. Here we will discuss about the mechanisms on different effects of nitrogen narcosis and what is the preventive strategies, right? As the questions comes here, is nitrogen narcosis is dangerous? As I mentioned, whenever we are in the normal pressures, nitrogen gas cannot cross the alveolar membrane. They cannot enter into the blood circulations, right? During exhalations, it exhales out from alveolar itself. But when pressure rises, it easily can cross and easily can enter into the circulatory blood as well as at the tissue, right? See, under normal conditions, nitrogen in the air is inert and it does not affect the brain function. However, at depths greater than 30 meters or 100 feet, a very important part, at depths greater than 30 meters or 100 feet, nitrogen dissolves into the bloodstream as well as brain tissue. And it is only due to high pressure or increased pressure. As I mentioned, at the surface, the atmospheric pressure is only 1 atmospheric pressure. At 10 meter depth, it again, the pressure rises another 1 atmospheric pressure. The total atmospheric pressure into 10 meter depth is 2 atmospheres, or in 66 feet, the total atmospheric pressure again rises. So here you can see with the changes of the depth, there is a changes in the dissolving property of the nitrogen. Nitrogen dissolves into the bloodstream and brain tissue, and it is only due to the high pressures. Since nitrogen is fat soluble, it accumulates in the brain and nerve cell and disrupting the nerve signal transmissions. So, as all of us know, the transmissions of the nerve impulse are basically carried out by some molecules. These are nothing, these are neurotransmitter molecules. But the nerve impulse transmission is also influenced by other things that are called as the proper functions of some ion channels that are present in the nerve cell membrane, mainly sodium and potassium ion channels. So what actually affected by the presence of high nitrogens into the brain cells or brain tissues, it affects the ionic channel, mainly sodium and potassium ion channel. Along with this, due to the effect of the ion channel, it directly affects the excitable property of the nerve cell. Nerve cells are unable to conduct the nerve impulse from one neuron to the next. Right? So, here, this leads to a nitrogen narcosis. So, what is the main reason? It is only due to the accumulations of the nitrogens into the brain tissue, right? This causes dizziness, confusions, poor decision making, euphoria, and hallucinations. All these symptoms may occur into the subjects who are descent to deep sea, right, or deep sea divers. The deeper the dive, the more nitrogen dissolves, worsening the effects, and the effects is very similar to the alcohol intoxications, right? But if you see the property, this nitrogen narcosis has a reverse property, right? To reverse the nitrogen narcosis, the diver must ascend to the shallower depth, right? So, if the divers ascend, there is a decrease in the pressure level. So, if the pressure levels falls down, nitrogen also comes out from the cells, from the tissues. See, to reverse nitrogen narcosis, the diver must ascend to a cellular depth, reducing the pressures, and that allows nitrogen to diffuse out of the nervous systems, right? If you see the exact mechanistic features of this nitrogen narcosis, as I already mentioned, the partial pressures of nitrogen increases, making nitrogen more soluble in body tissue, including the brain tissue, right? And it is a fat-soluble gas. It means it dissolves in lipid-rich tissue like the brains and nerve membranes, right? It interferes with the nerve transmissions or impulse transmissions by altering ion channels, mainly sodium and potassium ion channels. And it reduces the neurotransmitter release, mainly acetylcholines or dopamines or even the GABA, right? So, this high percentage of dissolved nitrogens in brain tissue ultimately affects our nervous systems. It impairs the impulse transmissions or signal transmissions from brain cells to brain cells. This disrupts communications between the brain cells, leading to cognitive impairments, delayed reaction times, and poor judgment, right? If you see the dose-dependent effect in nitrogen narcosis, so what is the meaning of dose-dependent effect? Here, dose-dependent effect actually depends on whether a person is very deep into the oceans or at the surface levels. See, the deeper a diver goes, the more nitrogen dissolves into the brain, right? And it causes increase in the narcotic effect. At greater depths, like when the person descends to 60 meters or around 200 feet or more, symptoms can become very severe, right? Including hallucinations, unconsciousness, and complete loss of coordinations, right? Again, here I mentioned about the reversible property. Here, the effects of nitrogen narcosis disappears when the diver ascends, because the nitrogen gradually lifts the nervous systems at pressure as pressure decreases, right? Now see, the symptoms of nitrogen narcosis can be classified into 3 different groups. Some are mild symptoms, moderate symptoms, and severe symptoms. All the symptoms mainly depends on the depth into which the diverse present, right? So in case of first ones, the mild symptoms may occur at 30 to 40 meters depth down the sea level, right? So what are the symptoms? The first symptoms is euphoria, the most important one, right? In this particular stage, the divers feels intense excitements and happiness, right? What are the other symptoms? Loss of concentrations, delayed reaction time. As we have already know, to give the reactions of a particular stimulus, we needs the impulse transmissions from neuron to neuron. Here, impulse transmission is already affected due to the effect into the ion channels of neuronal cell. So, even the persons may face difficulty in focusing on a particular task. What are the moderate symptoms and why it appears? It appears when the persons dive into 40 to 60 meter depth below the sea level, right? So most important symptoms are increased confusions, poor judgment and overconfidence, short-term memory loss and reduced motor skills, right? That is why there is a poor coordination, right? But in case of severe conditions, and it appears when the persons in around 60 meters or more than 60 meter depths. What are the symptoms? That are hallucinations, severe mental confusions, loss of consciousness or blackouts, and ultimately leads to the respiratory impairment, right? So these are different types of symptoms that may appear into the subjects who are very deep of the oceans or very deep into the sea, where the pressure levels is very, very high, right? Now, as I mentioned, as the symptom develops, how can we prevent the nitrogen narcosis or developments of nitrogen narcosis? Yes, we have some preventive strategies to prevent the developments of nitrogen narcosis. So these are most important influencing factors like that. Dive durations, like longer dives increase the nitrogen absorptions and there is a high chances of developments of nitrogen narcosis, right? And even increased level of carbon dioxide, or if the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high, it can worsen the nitrogen narcosis by increasing the brain sensitivity to nitrogen molecule, right? Fatigue and stress also act as influencing factors along with the cold water. So these are some influencing factors. Now, what is the preventive strategies? The preventive strategies means limit the depth, right? Limit the depth means reduce the pressure. See, if the pressure is less, there will be less chances of dissolving of nitrogens into the circulatory blood or tissues. Along with this, the most important ones for the divers, they basically use a mixture of gas. So what is the name of that mixture of gas? That is the heliox, that is the combination of two gas, that is helium and oxygen, or trimix, that is the combination of three different gas, helium, oxygen and nitrogens. So this mixture of gas reduces the nitrogen exposures and ultimately reduces the developments of nitrogen narcosis. So what is the property of the helium here? The property of the helium here is, if you see the dissolving property of helium and nitrogens, and helium is almost half, right? Nitrogen is more dissolved in the circulatory blood in high pressures, and that pressures the dissolving property reduced to half for helium, right? That is why helium is suggested for the divers along with the oxygens. Oxygens or partial pressures of oxygens or high partial pressures of oxygen is also toxic. So whenever the gas mixtures are prepared, the concentrations is the most important thing. In the mixture of gas, 95% is the helium gas and only 5% is the oxygen gas, right? As you know, in the atmospheric gas, 21% of the gas is oxygen. But here, in the gas chambers for the divers that are prepared, only 5% gas are added to the mixture of gases that reduce the narcotic effect of nitrogen. And another important thing that can prevent the development of this narcosis is ascent slightly. So if the person is ascent, so there is a high chances of the reductions of pressures. And maintain slow breathings. So these are some important preventive strategies by which we can minimize the developments of nitrogen narcosis. Now see that I've already mentioned about the helium. Helium is less soluble in fat and does not cause narcosis, and it reduces breathing resistance at extreme depth, right? Trimix or heliox is used in dive diapers. That is the persons who are beneath the 60 meters or more from the surface of the sea. Now see, another important things that I am going to discuss is decompression sickness. As you have already seen, with the increase of the depth, there is a high compression of the gas, right? Now here I am going to discuss about decompression sickness. So what is the property of the decompression sickness, and what is the disadvantage or negative impact of this decompression sickness? As see, if the diver ascends too quickly, the pressure drops rapidly and nitrogen comes out of solutions too fast, and it forms the bubble inside the body. It's like opening up a cap of a Coca-Cola bottle, right? When it is in a closed state, there is a high pressure of the gas, right? Once you open the cap, the gaseous bubbles comes out, right? Similar to this, in decompression sickness, you can find the same thing. This nitrogen gas is dissolved into the brain tissue, right? But in decompression sickness, once the person rapidly ascends from the deep sea, there is a high chances of the formations of the gas bubbles across the body, across the circulations, because it acts like a Coca-Cola bottle. Once you open the cap, the gaseous molecules comes out as a bubble, and these bubble formations in the blood vessels and the body fluids is very, very dangerous, right? That leads to the development of compression sickness, right? This decompression sickness is also known as the Cation disease. It is also known as the BANS, right? Or compression sickness of air. Means it can be termed by a different terminology. The meaning is same. So here, decompression sickness, commonly called the BANS, it occurs when nitrogen bubbles forms in the body due to rapid ascent after diving, right? So the most important effects of these bubbles is it blocks the blood vessels, right? If blood vessels are blocked by these bubbles, it directly affects the flow of blood. The cells will not get sufficient oxygenated blood or sufficient blood, right? And it is only due to the formations of these bubbles. And this decompression sickness has several negative impact. And based on the severity, the symptoms are of different types, right? So the most important symptoms that may happen is the musculoskeletal systems. Along with neural systems also affected by decompression sickness, and our pulmonary systems also mostly affected by decompression sickness. So what are the most important symptoms that may occur? These are joint pain, skin rashes, itching and swelling, dizziness, confusions and extreme fatigue. And even in some cases, the paralysis may happen, mainly the leg paralysis, and difficulty in breathing, and even unconsciousness also may occur in severe case. So these are the most important symptoms that may occur in decompression sickness, and this is only due to the rapid ascent of the divers, because if the divers ascends very rapidly, there is a high chances of the nitrogen bubble formation, and these bubbles spread across the body that ultimately affects different systems, mainly the musculoskeletal systems, nervous systems and the pulmonary systems. You can see here what is the physiological mechanisms of this decompression sickness of bands. See here, these symptoms can be classified into type 1 and type 2. Type 2. Now see, this is the actual diagrammatic representations. When the divers dive into the deep, nitrogen travels under high pressures from the lungs to the blood. See, at the surface, as I mentioned, nitrogen is stagnant in the alveoli, and from that alveoli it moves out by the exhalations. Once the diver dives into the deep, nitrogen travels under high pressures from lungs to the blood. Right? Now, the person can ascend in two ways, either rapid ascent or slow ascent. Right? So, what we see in the decompression sickness, the person ascends very rapidly. Right? So, what is the impact of this very rapid ascent? Impact is swimming up too fast doesn't give nitrogen enough time to leave the blood. Right? That leads to the formations of that nitrogen gas bubble. But the person who slowly return, in that particular case, nitrogen got sufficient time to get out in a normal process. Right? So, what is the preventive strategies? The preventive strategies is to prevent decompression sickness, divers follow decompression stops. So, what is the meaning of decompression stops? Decompression stops is after a certain, ascending of certain distance, the divers should pause for some time. Right? That gives sufficient time for nitrogen gas to release out in normal way. That prevents the formations of gaseous bubble. Right? So, decompression pause is very, a pause is very important here. Where they pause at a specific depth to allow nitrogen to leave the body very slowly through normal breathing. Right? If decompression sickness occurs, what are the most important mode of treatment? Yes, the most important mode of treatment is hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which involves placing the divers in a pressurized chamber, and that pressurized chamber contains the combination of gas, that is heliox and trimix, right? And heliox reduces the dissolving property of the nitrogens with the bliss. Instead, helium prevents the development of even nitrogen narcosis, as well as it reduces the illness due to decompression sickness. Here you can see the formations of bubbles, how it forms into the blood vessels, right? And here in decompression sickness, both the law, like Henry's law and Boyle's law, are very much applicable. So how both the Henry's law and Boyle's law are applicable here in the decompression sickness? You can see, according to Henry's law, more gas dissolves into a liquid when pressure increases. This means more nitrogen dissolves into the diver's blood and tissues as they remain under water, right? The deeper and longer a dive, the more nitrogen accumulates in the body, right? Whereas, according to the Boyle's law, bubble formations on rapid ascent. So, Boyle's law states that with the increase of depth, there is an increase of pressures, right? And see, as pressure decreases, the volume of gas increases. In decompression sickness, the person try to ascend. So, when they try to ascend, there is a decrease in the pressures. So, low pressures causes the volume of gas increases. Now, the dissolved nitrogens in the blood expands and forms the bubbles instead of safely diffusing out through the lungs. So, this is how both the Boyle's law and Henry's laws are related, involved. the development of the decompression sickness. Now see here, as I already mentioned, it not only affects the musculoskeletal systems, it also affects the neural systems along with the pulmonary systems. So how it affects the pulmonary systems and other systems? See, the chokes, that means there is a shortness of breath, chest pain, coughing and dizziness, and it is only due to the formations of gas bubbles across the lungs. And even in severe conditions, there is a formation of embolism, which is called arterial gas embolisms. In arterial gas embolisms, nitrogen bubbles can enter the arteries, blocking the blood flow to the brain, to the heart, or even in the lungs, which ultimately leads to the development of some cardiac events like strokes, heart failure, and even in severe cases, there is high chances of death. Now you can see from these diagrams the ruptures of the alveolus. It is only due to the rapid ascent of the persons, and the ruptures of the alveolus releases the nitrogen bubbles, and these bubbles enters into the circulations, and they circulate until and unless they block into the vessels. Here you can see these bubbles blocks here in the nervous system, that leads to decrease in the blood flow into the nerve tissue, right? So there are some important factors or influencing factors of decompression sickness, that are rapid ascent, deep and long dives, then skipping decompression pause or decompression stops, along with cold water, dehydrations, and even obesity also influence the decompression sickness. What are the preventive strategies? Preventive strategies are slow and controlled ascent, the most important one, right? Slow and controlled ascent. Otherwise, there is a high chance of bubble formation. Decompression stops is required. Use of dive computer. Dive computers actually gives the divers in advance information about the pressures as well as the level of nitrogens. Stay hydrated. Avoid alcohol and smoking before the diving. Use of mixed gas. Another most important things that can prevent the development of the sickness, that is trimix and use of heliox gas. Now see, as I already mentioned that the high partial pressures of gas in deep sea not only develop the nitrogen narcosis, it also leads to the oxygen toxicity and carbon dioxide toxicity. So here you can see in deep sea or deep into the ocean, the pressures of oxygen is very high. So due to the high oxygen pressures, it can damage the cells, right? Leads to the development of some symptoms like seizures and lung failures. In oxygen toxicity, the most important thing that may happen is in high pressures or in normal conditions, the intracellular oxidation causes the production of some free radicals like hydrogen peroxide and oxygen radicals. As you know, the free radicals are harmful for us. But in normal conditions, when the person produces the free radicals by intracellular oxidation process, to counterattack these free radicals, we have another mechanism called antioxidant mechanisms, right? There are some antioxidant enzymes like catalase, superoxide dismutase, oxidase. These are antioxidant enzymes. In normal conditions, to scavenge the free radicals, these antioxidant enzymes are sufficient. But when the persons are in the deep sea, when the pressures of oxygen is very high, the rate of intracellular oxidation is also very high, right? This rapid intracellular oxidations produce more and more amount of free radicals, right? Though there is a scavenging property, though there is a antioxidant molecules present in the cells, but these antioxidant enzymes are not sufficient to remove those free radicals on time, right? That is the problem. that leads to the development of the toxicity, right? There is a high chances of the depositions of those free radicals into the tissue. It means depositions of those free radicals ultimately causes the cell damage. So here, this is the most important mechanism that is related with the oxygen toxicity. See, here I have already mentioned the toxic effect of oxygens are permanently, and it is due to overproductions of ROS. So, what are these? These are hydrogen peroxide and oxygen radicals. These are reactive oxygen species, and which causes oxidative stress and ultimately leads to the cellular damage. Now, to counterattack these free radicals, as I mentioned, we have the systems, but in high pressures or high oxygen pressures or in the deep sea, it is very difficult to remove that free radical molecules, ultimately leads to the cellular damage. And the most important site for due to the oxygen toxicity, the affected sites are our nervous systems, lungs, and eyes. You can see from here how it affects the CNS. What is the mode of actions? ROS interferes with the neurotransmitter, particularly GABA, leading to the overstimulations of neurons. As I mentioned, it affects the CNS, it affects the ocular systems. So, in CNS, it affects the neurotransmitter GABA, ultimately leads to the overstimulations of neurons. This overactivity causes twitching, convulsions, and seizures. It's like a epilepsy type features. And even in some cases, the vasoconstrictions may happen. So, what is the features of this? High oxygen level cause blood vessels in the brains to constrict. If the vessels is constrict, so it is very difficult to get sufficient oxygen for the brain cells or brain tissues. This can result in dizziness, confusions, and unconsciousness. At the same time, if you see the mechanism of actions in the pulmonary systems of high oxygen patients in the deep sea, high oxygen levels cause inflammations and damage to the alveoli or lung alveoli. So, if the lung alveoli are damaged, so it is very difficult to accommodate the required amounts of gas for the respirations. This leads to fluid accumulations in the lungs called the development of pulmonary edema. And even in other cases, as we already know, the role of surfactant, shears in deep sea or into the deep divers, the oxygen toxicity may lead to the effects into the surfactants. So, what is the effect into the surfactant here? Which prevents lung collapse. Generally, we know surfactant prevents the lung collapse, but due to the oxygen toxicity, it damages the surfactant molecules. Right? At the same time, in lung fibrosis also, oxygen toxicity causes the development of lung fibrosis, and it is mainly due to long-term exposures into the deep of the oceans. The pressures is very high. These are some symptoms that is related to the oxygen toxicity, like chest pain, difficulty in breathing, persistent cough, and pulmonary edema, as I have already mentioned. Now, in the ocular systems also it may affect. What is the mechanism? Mechanism is high oxygen levels in newborns cause abnormal growth of retinal blood vessels that leads to the vision loss. Along with this, oxidative stress means due to the development of free radicals, it damages the eye lens proteins, which ultimately leads to the high chances of development of cataracts. So these are some of the important things that is related to oxygen toxicity. So till now I have discussed three things. The first one is nitrogen narcosis, and nitrogen narcosis is mainly due to the formations of nitrogen bubbles that affects our nervous systems. I have discussed about the decompression sickness. In decompression sickness, what it says, due to the rapid ascent, there is a less at times the nitrogen molecules get to comes out properly. Due to this, there is a high chances of development of complications. And in oxygen toxicity also, we have seen there is a generation of some free radicals, and these free radicals affects the cellular systems. Cellular damage may occur in oxygen toxicity. Now, along with this, in some cases, we can say occasionally, the carbon dioxide toxicity may happens into deep divers. In carbon dioxide toxicity, what we see generally, the pressures of carbon dioxide in deep sea is again high, but due to reuse of the same carbon dioxide gas, there is high chances of the development of more and more partial pressures of carbon dioxide, right? So it stimulates the respiratory scientists. Due to the rebreathing of the carbon dioxide, the partial pressures of carbon dioxide is becoming more and more, right? And this high partial pressures of carbon dioxide causes the stimulations of our respiratory systems, right? Once the partial pressures of carbon dioxide cross the 80 millimeter of mercury, that suddenly it depresses our respiratory systems called respiratory depressions. And due to respiratory depressions, there is a respiratory acidosis. So here, the most important thing that happens in carbon dioxide toxicity is respiratory acidosis, and it is only due to rebreathing of carbon dioxide that changes the pressures or partial pressures of carbon dioxide along with the pH into a pH of blood, ultimately leads to the respiratory acidosis. So this is what is about the physiology of deep sea and how the different systems are affected due to the changes of pressures or due to high pressures in deep sea.